Yeah. Well, we'll give it a few minutes for people to trickle in. There's one other person besides me. I know there'll be at least one more, and I know at least one person will be watching online. So as I said, maybe a small one for us this month, but we're really happy to have you and ready to hear what you have to say. And I am recording the room, so we should be able to get you a video of the meet room later if you'd like to use it for your purposes. So you'll get something out of this.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll give it a few minutes for people to trickle in and get ready. Sounds good. And yeah, if you want to make sure you can share your slides if you have any, feel free. I hope you should have permissions to do that.
I do have slides. Let me see if, let's see, I'll use Google Meetup. Where's the become presenter button?
EFF Austin Meetup?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, yeah, we'll get started in a few minutes.
Actually, all right, let's try present. I assume it lets me, select window, okay.
Yeah. It looks like Carey, I gotta check, make sure our other live stream's going on. One second.
Yeah, I've been trying to realize, and this is the least amount of people have showed up. So, yeah, that's me.
All right, looks like I could share. I'm going to stop sharing for now because when I do that, I have to go full screen and I can't see you guys.
Right.
So I'll wait.
Yeah, I just saw a slide, looked good there. Yeah, so we'll give it a few minutes for people to trickle in. If it's, usually when we have a slower month, I wait till like 5 after, and then I talk for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I turn things over to our speaker.
Sure.
But
so you guys are down in Austin, eh?
Yeah, no, we're the Austin EFF adjacent group, yeah.
Yes. What's is this like a meeting space behind you, or are you guys calling it from work, or what's
this is kind of our version of Y Combinator Capital Factory. It's kind of our startup incubator. Their CEO, many years ago, before I was involved with EFF Austin, was actually on our board. So we've been kind of grandfathered for a long time to get to use their Meetup space.
All right.
Yeah, we're appreciative of that. Yeah, and certainly very excited. We're always excited when we have a mini celebrity like yourself agree to come talk to us.
What kind of backgrounds? I know we've probably talked about this before, but it's been some time since we set this up. So, what kind of backgrounds do you guys have?
I mean, I'm a programmer, full stack web cloud developer.
I just have kind of like a casual interest in cryptography and information theory and related stuff.
Yeah. And then, as far as the EFF Austin board, we're a mix of programmers, tech lawyers, activists, journalists, you name it.
All right. Yeah, I've interviewed many people from the EFF and had a couple shows about the EFA. Doing some great stuff.
Well, anytime you profile them again, happy to guest if you have a panel. The other groups know a number of people and a number of the good people. Probably the ones I'm best familiar with are EF Georgia, Oakland Privacy, PDX, Cyber Collective, Stop.
Yeah, I've talked to the Stop guys.
Oh, and Lucy Parsons, I know them pretty well too.
I'm sorry, which one?
And Lucy Parsons Lab, I know them pretty well as well.
Yep, I've talked to they were on a panel of 2 folks plus the forget the name, the guy that was running EFA at the time, which I think he's still doing it.
Well, let's see. I think unless he's been promoted up, I'm trying to think who technically runs it at this point because it used to be Nash, but he may have been promoted upstairs.
Yeah, I think it was him. But
If you go far back into the mists, it was Shahed.
Let's see. Here it is. It was Rory.
Oh, Rory, yes. And Rory, I interface with Rory. And Rory's, they are still running here.
And on that particular show, it was Freddie Martinez from Lucy Parsons and Chris Bushik from PDX.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So those are the folks that
Yeah, I know Chris. Yeah. Cool. Well, as I said, we'll give it another couple minutes, and anybody on the live stream, we're just giving a few more minutes to see if a few more people want to trickle in, and then we'll get going. But yeah, definitely feel honored to know a lot of cool people at EFF and in the EFA. Yeah, I still get vaguely fanboy over the time I got to have cocktails with Cory Doctorow, so that was fun.
Yes, of course, Brian.
Oh, I know. It's definitely if you want to have that experience of, I know most people tell me I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm like really stupid compared to this person. I recommend chatting with Cory.
Dude knows a lot. I can quote it off the top of his head.
I mean, that's the real thing. His recall is what blows my mind. I can seem that smart if you like let me prepare something in advance, but he just getting on the spot.
Yeah, well, the dude talks a lot, so.
I mean, I don't even know how he sleeps because he just seems to write 24/7 and read 24/7.
I know, right? Yeah, I've been trying to have cocktails with him for a long time. I've managed to have dinner and some other hangouts with him, but never, I'd love to just sit back and drink with that guy for a while, because that would be a riot.
Yeah, no, we took him to the Roosevelt Room here in Austin when he was in town at UT for a talk.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, it's certainly been a pleasure getting to know yourself better via the channel that my board member introduced me to. A lot of illustrious names in that community.
Yeah. Good group of people.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And plus, I have to stay informed on these issues. A lot of very informed people telling me about things going on I would miss otherwise. Anyway, all right, we've given enough time for people to trickle in. We may have one or two more trickle in, but we've technically hit my goal of minimum of 5 every meetup, so we'll go ahead and get started. All right.
All right.
I will go ahead and pull up my info. Oh, and we got one more. Hello. We're just about to get started.
What application are we running?
This is something Cat Factory provides. It's technically Google Meet. Yeah. But yeah, I asked them, I used to do the remote speakers with my own laptop, but my laptop is Linux, and Capital Factory Systems projectors do not like my Linux, so we're using their system, just easier.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, let me pull up my little info here, and we will get going.
How's the bandwidth? Are there any breaking up?
Oh, you're looking great. I mean, this is, another benefit of partnering with Cat Factory. They got the money to have the gear.
All right. Your video's a little shaky, but as long as mine's all right.
You're great. So apologies if we're a little choppy on your end, but you're great. Let me find this here real quick. There it is. Okay, pal. What's up? Alrighty. Oh, and one more arrival. Just about to get started, just in time. All right, welcome everyone to the latest monthly oh, and another one. See, they're all trickling in now, Carey, you see? So I got you more like 7, 8, 9, and I don't even know how many are on the live stream, so we're doing all right. I always panic every month, and then it ends up being fine.
Yeah, I know how that goes. I used to run a bi-weekly meeting at work, and I was the same thing every time. I never knew it was going to show.
Yeah, and so I always am sort of like, I want to promise my speakers good attendance, but then I'm also just like, well, I can't literally hold a gun to their heads and force them to come, Well, I could, but... All right, anyway.
I was in Texas, by the way. I lived in Dallas for like 3 years.
Oh, yeah?
Working for Nortel.
Yep.
Oh, beautiful. We always went there just for fun. Never did the bird.
Well, if you ever come back through, hit me up. I've been here for like over 35 years. Definitely know some good spots.
All right.
Anyway, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the latest monthly installment of the EFF Austin Meetup. My name is Kevin Welch. I'm the current president of the board at EFF Austin. I see both old and new faces. Welcome all. And for those of you who are new and are like, what's EFF Austin? Well, as you might have guessed from the name, we are an Austin-based digital civil liberties organization. We work closely with Electronic Frontier Foundation, who are based out of San Francisco. They are the nation's oldest and largest digital civil liberties advocacy group. You can sort of think of them as the ACLU for the internet. They work to protect your rights in emerging technological spaces and keep you safe from bad legislation, especially your First and Fourth Amendment rights. They're very much about your freedom of speech and free expression, as well as your right to privacy, which is implied by our Fourth Amendment Amendment. So yeah, they fight for all sorts of good stuff like net neutrality, end-to-end encryption, protecting Section 230 of the CDA, which lets user-generated content thrive. They're really, trying to look out for the little guy in technological spaces and make it so it's not just the domain of governments and corporations, and so that ordinary people can benefit from this tech. They're awesome. Definitely you should donate your time and resources to them, but that being said, there are many other groups, depending on where you live, you can also get involved with. The EFF runs what's called the EFA, or the Electronic Frontier Alliance. It's kind of a peer-to-peer activism network of about 100 groups around the United States that do not technically have a formal legal affiliation with each other, but they all coordinate because they all feel similarly on these issues. EFF mostly handles federal legislation and stuff like that, and also a focus on stuff that goes on in California, while as most of the other EFA groups handle things at various city and state levels. And interestingly enough, both EFF Austin, we are the oldest member of the EFA. We're actually almost as old as EFF. They've been around since 1990, we like 1991. So, if you want to get a drink with me after, happy to tell you more of that history. We're both the oldest, and not only are we the only one in Austin, we're actually, even though there's 100 groups, we're the only EFA member in Texas still, as far as I know, so we have to cover a lot of ground. Unlike National EFF, our resources are a lot more limited. We mostly make up for it by having a network of very smart, driven volunteers. We primarily are an educational organization. This takes the form of mostly the monthly meetups here at Capitol Factory, which had for a long time been on the second Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. Next month, we're probably having my friend Evan Inzer, who is with another EFA group, or was, STOP in New York City, Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, probably going to be giving us a talk about the surveillance privacy nightmare that is modern cars. So I suggest come in and see him that one. But yeah, we primarily do education. We also have been known to occasionally throw big fun cyberpunk parties if I can find an eccentric tech millionaire to fund it. If you know any, please introduce me to them. It's been a while since we've had a nice big one. Also, we do actually do some advocacy work at both the city and state level, putting our money where our mouth is. At the city level, we most prominently recently were involved in some of the arguments over bringing back automated license plate readers. While we were unable to stop them coming back, we were happy that our involvement in the debate managed to seriously strengthen the data retention period on the devices. We were lost by one vote, getting it down to 3 minutes. We did have to settle for 1 week, which is actually still massively stricter than most of the country. So it's not what we'd like, but we're still happy with our small victory. They wanted a year, so yeah. And then finally, probably most recently, we've also been involved in some things at the state level, and most recently at that. Last year, we gave some testimony on HB4, the Big Data Privacy Omnibus Bill. We were happy they passed some data privacy legislation because we had none. They didn't go as far as we wanted, and unfortunately, most of our recommendations of going farther did not make it into the initial legislation, but it's on the record, and we hope to keep improving on it in future sessions. We also have been recently sought out as expert advice on the State House's new panel that Rep. Capriglione is convening on AI regulation, and so we've been trying to give some of our thoughts and feedback on that and hopefully prevent AI regulation in this state from turning into a shit show. So yeah, that's a little bit about some of the stuff we've been up to recently. As I said, if you like the stuff you hear here, we encourage you to get involved in our community. We're all volunteer driven, so if you're like, why aren't you guys doing something? Well, it's just because we don't have the bandwidth. You could be that person. And also, if you yourself would like to give a talk or know someone interesting who would like to give a talk at some point, please make my life easy and volunteer. So anyway, I think that's enough about us and what we are up to at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to our speaker here. And, I'm very happy that one of the few good things that came out of COVID is massive improvements in remote technology. So I'm happy that I am now much more easily able to field remote speakers who do not actually live in Austin. Also, always very happy when we get people who, are, moderately famous in this space. And that definitely qualifies, I think, for tonight's speaker. We've had a number of fairly big luminaries in this space recently speak to us. We had Bruce Steyer speak last year, as well as Peter Wang. But yeah, we definitely are happy to have another minor celebrity in the privacy security space with us this month. Our speaker this month is Carey Parker. Carey is the author of the book Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, a step-by-step guide to computer security and privacy for non-techies. He hosts a podcast of the same name, as well as a blog and a newsletter. He recently retired from a 28-year career in software engineering to focus on teaching others how to defend their digital devices and protect their personal data. And then, yeah, just to tee Carey off with the topic of Carey's talk, Carey's talk is titled Capturing Chaos, Harvesting Environmental Entropy. And to explain that, much is made for the need for strong passwords and keys, but most cryptographic processes also require a source of entropy. While computers are excellent at doing what they're told, they suck at generating true randomness. Even when gathering high-quality entropy, the pool can be quickly depleted with many processes invoking cryptographic functions in rapid succession. So Carey's going to explain to us why entropy is so important, give examples of randomness failures, and discuss techniques for generating high-quality random values in low-cost embedded systems. So with that wonderfully niche, geeky topic, take it away, Carey.
All right, thanks, Kevin. All right, everybody, thank you very much for coming. He gave you a pretty good intro. Let me start sharing here. And by the way, once I start sharing, I won't be able to see you. I can still hear you. So if you raise your hand, I will not see you. But if you have a burning question, shout out and I can answer it. Otherwise, we'll do Q&A at the end, and I'll be happy to take Q&A on any topic you'd like, not just what we're talking about today. So let's try this. You guys see it all right?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, great. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about capturing chaos and how we want to harvest environmental entropy and why. So there'll be a lot of pop culture references here. Anyone get this one? Anybody know who this character is?
That's for chaos.
You're not dealing with Gen Z here. We know who that is.
All right, so you already said this, but real quick, a little bit about me. So yes, I'm an author. I wrote a book. It's in its 5th edition. Basically, after Snowden revelations, I decided I wanted to do something about that. And I don't know about you guys, but if you've got a decently large family, you're the IT guy for the family. So everyone was asking me questions anyway. So I thought, why not just put all of that in a book that I could say here, and then do that for other people like us who get tired of answering those questions, and they can just say here. So it's got lots of pictures and stuff, and it's really meant for regular everyday people, which is 95% of the planet. So anyway, that was the idea for that, and then eventually I became a podcast. I call myself a security and privacy evangelist because I know experts and I can't really hold a candle to a lot of this stuff, so I don't like to put myself in the same category. But I'm absolutely a security and privacy evangelist, advocate. I've been doing this for several years now. The book came out almost 10 years ago now. As Kevin said, I was a software engineer for about 28 years. I did telecom software. As you may have heard me earlier, I lived in Dallas for 3 years, working for Nortel. I lived in Memphis for a few years, working for a startup you've never heard of because it went under. And then I went to Lucent here. I'm in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. I worked for Lucent for a little bit. I worked for Cisco for many years, and that was the last company I worked at before I had an amazing opportunity to retire early, and I took it. But by degree, I'm an electrical engineer. So I went to Purdue University. I've got a bachelor's and master's degree. So, okay, what are we going to talk about today? So first of all, what is entropy? And by the way, kind of my shtick is I assume you don't know anything. So this will be, old hat to some of you. Some of these things you're going to know the answer to and may get bored, but I'm going to try to explain it as if you're really not that up on this stuff to keep us all on the same page, and also just kind of keep it light and simple. We're going to talk about what happens if you screw entropy up. We're going to talk about why computers suck at doing it. And so then what do we do about that? Well, if the computer can't do it, we've got to find our entropy somewhere else. So we're going to talk about how we might harvest entropy or randomness from the environment around us. And then how useful is that? I actually want to go through the motions of doing this and figure out how viable that was and how much entropy we can actually get from the environment. And you'll see as we go through this, I wanted to sort of focus on cheap solutions. I didn't want to throw a lot of money at this because, for example, our IoT devices are cheap. They don't have very powerful electronics in a lot of cases. So we really need some solutions that can scale all the way down. So that's kind of why I did this, and that's where we're going to end up today, showing you how I tried to do that and how successful I was at doing so. Okay, what's entropy? Okay, so according to thermodynamics, it's not all heat energy can be converted into work in a cyclic process. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know either. But entropy is basically a measure of disorder in a system. And the law of thermodynamics basically here says that entropy never decreases over time. Which is to say, the classic example is a falling teacup will spontaneously break into shards, but if you drop a bunch of shards, they're not going to spontaneously form into a teacup. That's sort of the notion of this law of thermodynamics. So, entropy, it's chaos, it's uncertainty, it's unpredictability. In our case, we're kind of focused on the fact that it's randomness. And so what do we mean by random? When most of us think about randomness, we think about fair randomness. That is, when you flip a coin, either side of that coin is equally likely to come up. If you roll a die that has 6 sides, any 6 of those sides, any one of those 6 sides is equally likely to occur. Sometimes we talk about it in terms of noise. As an electrical engineer, we talk about noise a lot. White noise, we think about as being uniformly distributed across all frequencies. Any given frequency within the range of frequencies, and really with white noise, all frequencies, is equally likely to occur. If you look at that on a spectrum analyzer, it's kind of flat and everywhere. There are other colors. You've probably heard of pink noise or brown noise. There are other ones that aren't, quote unquote, fair. They're different. Their distributions are usually restricted to certain frequency ranges, so just in case you've heard those terms. But white noise is kind of what we think about as any particular frequency is equally likely. How do we determine if something has a uniform probability distribution, if all the different outcomes are possible and they're equally likely? Generally speaking, the simplest way is you just do it a whole bunch of times. If you flip a coin 10 times, maybe it's 4 heads, 6 tails, 40-60, that's not really what you expect. But if you did it 1,000,000 times, if you did 1,000,000,000 times, you would expect it to come out pretty darn close to 50-50. So that's kind of how we would test things, just generally speaking, the most brute force method possible. We just do it a whole bunch of times and then check the results. So you can see on the right, these are some kind of outputs for if you have a die and you roll it, if all 6 outcomes are equally likely. If you take 2 dice and add up the results, or 3 dice and add up the results, or 4 dice and add up the results, you see an interesting property of uniform distributions. The first one there is a uniform distribution. Everyone is equally likely. If you take the sum of those and do it multiple times, you start to get what looks like a bell curve, or a Gaussian distribution. So you might, I thought that was kind of an interesting revelation. But there are other ones too, like Poisson. You've probably heard of some of these if you've done anything in statistics. There are other distribution curves as well that are not quote unquote fair. So what happens if entropy fails? Well, let's talk about, here's another pop culture reference. In cryptography, the algorithms themselves, as you may or may not know, are public. They're not secret in any way. The only part of the algorithm that's supposed to be secret are the keys or the passwords or things like that, things that you know, the inputs to the algorithm. But the algorithm itself, generally speaking, is supposed to be completely public and open so that really smart people can look at those things and try to beat them up and find problems with them. But also under the covers, these algorithms and processes that we use in cryptography require other random inputs, things that are generated by the system, not by you, the user, like a password or a passphrase or something. And so, there are random curves, random primes, there's what we call a nonce, a number used once. A lot of times, a lot of algorithms have these nonces where they need to generate some random value as part of a challenge-response pair so that you can't have a replay attack. Because you want to pick a number that no one's ever seen before, and use that as part of a challenge, and then the response, when you get back, it can't be a replay attack where someone tried to, I saw that number before, so I know what the right answer is, I'm going to give the answer to that. You don't want that, that's why it's a number used once, or a nonce. So anyway, there's several situations where you want the system to be able to generate something random, and the other way to say that is that it's unpredictable. So the problem is, if you know how these algorithms work and you know where they're getting their randomness, their sources of entropy, if you can cause that entropy to fail, or if you know that it's not good in some way, or put it in a certain situation where you can start predicting the outcomes of these random sources, then you can significantly weaken, sometimes trivially weaken, these encryption and security processes. Here's a couple quick case studies. So back 2009, the Hacker News had your accounts, and so you log in. The way login sessions normally work on the web is you'll give them your credentials, you do the challenge response, and when they approve you, they'll send you back a cookie with some sort of a random session ID. And it should be long and random enough that someone else can't guess it, because if they could guess that session ID, they could pretend as you are currently logged in. But the random number generator was seeded with the system start time. And we'll talk about how you see these things in a minute. But basically, it's a way to kind of prime the pump for these things to generate random numbers in an unpredictable way. But because it was based on the system start time, like when the system was booted, this hacker figured out, well, I can force the system to reboot, so I know roughly what time is being fed to the random number generator, and through some other cleverness, basically was able to predict people's session IDs and then gain access to their accounts. Another one was YubiKey. You think of YubiKey as being a very secure hardware key that you can use for two-factor authentication or to hold secrets. But back in 2019, their special government FIPS series key had a problem. At startup, as part of its startup process, the pool of Entropy, and I'm going to talk more about that later, but it tried to build up a bunch of random bits that it could use for these processes, these cryptographic processes, algorithms. And unfortunately, at startup, when you first plug in your key, there were about 80 bits of that pool of entropy that were predictable. There was some startup self-test it was doing that left some predictable number of bits in that entropy pool. So at the beginning of time, for certain types of keys, that could be a real problem. Now, it turns out with the 2048-bit RSA key, which is pretty common, that's only about 4% of those bits. So it's not that big a deal. But when you start talking like elliptic curve keys, which have much shorter key sizes for roughly the same level of security. That's one of the benefits for elliptic curve is you could get by with much shorter keys and have about the same level of security. But if you only have a 256-bit key, 80 bits is a lot. It's like it's over 30% of that key. And that whittles down the possible space for that key, which makes it easier to brute force attack, to try to guess what those keys are. And of course, here's a classic one. Elliptic curve is supposed to be the savior, used for a lot of things for post-quantum and things like that. But there was what appears to be what they called a kleptographic backdoor that the NSA reportedly, and this is allegedly paid the RSA security team $10 million to push the adoption of this very special version of this with this special setup that was very predictable. Snowden kind of hinted at this bull run program that he talked about in 2013. The New York Times followed up on it, and it did sort of seem to be true. And the NIST, the government organization, I always get it wrong, National Institute of Science and Technology, I think. Anyway, NIST, who puts out a lot of these standards for people and as recommendations for people to use, revoked their recommendation for this after the story broke. So in this case, it was deliberately backdoored. So that the random number was weakened enough that the NSA's computer systems could crack things that were encrypted with this. And then the one that really actually got me inspired me to do this study and eventually this talk was at DEF CON 29. There was a presentation that was a great name. It's called "You're Doing IoT RNG Wrong." You're doing IoT wrong is the thing, but RNG in this case is random number generator. And a lot of these cheap IoT devices that they found had this function you could call. It says the hardware abstraction layer, the HAL, give me a random number. Sounds great. Give me a random number. And so it would give you a random number, but it also was returning an error code that nobody was checking. So if you're in software engineering, you know that's not good practice. And it turned out that a lot of cases, this function call for a random number was failing. It was returning something, but they weren't checking the return code to know that what they were getting was junk. And in some cases, if they did this long enough, if they basically depleted the available entropy pool in the system, at some point it just starts returning 0 all the time, which is hardly random. And so if you knew that, you could try to drive these IoT systems to generate a whole bunch of randomness in a short period of time to deplete the pool, and then you knew that the randomness they were getting was bogus, and then you could use that to attack the system. So anyway, this was the talk that kind of sparked this idea in my head and led me down this road. Okay, so computers suck at entropy. Why is that? Well, as you may or may not know, my guess is most of you do, computers use what's called a pseudo-random number generator, PRNG.
to generate sequences of numbers, this is crucial, sequences of numbers that have a uniform probability distribution. So these sequences of numbers, even though over time they are randomly distributed, let's say if you're generating random numbers between 1 and 10 or 1 and 1,000 or whatever, and you do enough of them, it will, the output space will look flat. Every potential output will look equally likely. But they are completely deterministic, which is to say that you know what they're going to be even though they're supposedly distributed randomly. For example, note that this sequence, 0 through 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it is uniform. Every possible value between 0 and 9 occurs just once, or the same number of times. In this case, it's once. So it's uniform in that sense, but it's partly random. So that's how something could be uniform in terms of its distribution, and yet not random. So a pseudo-random number generator that is used by most computer systems will produce the exact same sequence of numbers every time, which is why these algorithms, these PRNGs, actually want you to seed them with something that is actually random. Like, you know, prime the pump, give me something to start with so that I can kind of start somewhere randomly in the sequence so that you don't know where I am and that these numbers will be unpredictable. So now we're right back where we started from, right? So the computer is capable of doing this sort of, but it still needs some source of entropy, some random source to seed it to get it going and to be unpredictable by an outside party. So here's a quick Python example for you. So you can see on the left, I import the random function from within Python. Python is extremely rich language with all sorts of great built-in goodies. And I wrote a simple little routine that says flip a coin. And the results are either H or T, heads or tails. And I print out the results. And then I call the random process and I seed it with the value 0. And then I say, okay, do that 20 times in a row, print out the results. And if you do this, you'll see that 5 times in a row gave me the exact same sequence of heads and tails. Now, because of this seed value here, the seed value is 0, so the seed value is the same every time. It's going to generate the same sequence of results every single time. Now, this is why a lot of these libraries seed themselves by default. If I comment that line out, then don't seed it myself with an unrandom fixed value and do it run it again, it will take that opportunity to seed itself. Under the covers, I'm not sure what the library does. Maybe it does use system time, or maybe it tries to find some other randomness in the system to seed itself. And you can see at that point that the values are different every time. Because I didn't give it a seed, it took it upon itself to seed itself. But I could have, for instance, I could have seeded this with the current time of day or find some other sorts of randomness. Time of day is not great. Again, that's kind of predictable. If you knew what that was, as a bad guy, as an attacker, I could use that to my advantage. So hopefully you find something better, which is kind of where we're going with this today. Okay, so what kind of sources of entropy might we look for on a computer? So again, because you can't really do it you can't really do it with programming, you can't really do it with hardware so much. So a lot of times we look for external sources of randomness. Humans are great sources of randomness. We tend to be chaotic. If you look at like how, the timing between key presses or kind of track the X and Y coordinates of a mouse or a trackpad movement, that can be very, very random as far as the computer's concerned for entropy sources. But if you're on a server, you don't have that option. There's really not humans hanging around on a server. So what do servers do? Well, they can look at things like network packet timing. The distance between packet arrivals, for example, can be pretty random. Devices interrupting might be another source of randomness. Hard drive timing measurements. Sometimes hard drives, seek times and things like that. If you start looking for data on your system, you can find things that have real-world interactions that lend them to be somewhat random. So I want to gather this entropy because I need this as a source. I need to pool these sources of entropy so that I can use them as needed when somebody comes along and says, hey, give me a random number. So I want to pool all this together, harvest as much entropy from my environment as I can, and store it up into a reservoir of real entropy that I can draw from. If you're familiar with Linux, you're probably familiar with this. /dev/random is the system's entropy pool. There's also another one you may have heard of, /dev/urandom. which it's been a little while since I've done all this, so forgive me if I get some of this wrong. But my understanding is the dev random is really the collection of the entropy that we're talking about here, these external sources. But because that is limited and could be sucked dry potentially, it will take some of those values and then seed into a random number generator, PRNG, and then try to expand that kind of like triples, right? Try to make more randomness from those things and put that into a slightly larger pool under random. But if you're not careful, even so, you can still drain that randomness pool dry. So if you're up to it, if you want to try this later, here's a simple bash script that just basically pulls the top 5 values of a certain, so many bits off the top of dev random and dev random. And so you can run this to see what's out there, and it kind of formats it in a nice way. And you can see what's in there. And it turns out that you can check the pool depth. These are Linux commands you can use to see how much entropy is in there. Depending on what version of the kernel you have, it might give you a slightly different result, so you'll need to understand what it's telling you and what a full pool actually means in those cases. One's in bits, one's in bytes, for example, and they're a little different. But with what I just showed you before, actually in this case you're just calling out over and over again. If you open up 2 different windows, and in one case you watch that entropy depth, just that command at the top of the screen there, and you just do it once a second or so, and just print it out and see what the current depth is. And you go to a different window, and you just say cat dev random to something else, just start pulling from it. You can actually see it drain. You can watch it drain. Then when you kill that cat command, when you stop just pulling randoms out as fast as you can, you'll watch it fill back up, because it's then going back and desperately trying to fill up that pool from whatever sources of entropy it has been using. So that's a little fun thing you can do to kind of show what that looks like on a Linux system. Okay, so we want to harvest entropy from our environment. How might we actually do that? So, again, if you're looking at if you want to use sensors, for example, if you want to look at light or sound, temperature, movement, timing of real world events, these are things that you can look at potentially to find something that's semi-random. We can measure this using sensors, like hardware sensors, which we'll talk about here in a minute. We can measure these things. And of course, the nature of electronics to begin with is such that there's noise just in electronics, period. So even as you're measuring these things, you will find some additional entropy just by measuring it. There's going to be just some electrical noise in the system. And that, in this case, it's good. We want that. We want more entropy, so that works to our advantage here. There are some other weird things you can do, which I'll talk about here in a minute. If you really get down into transistors and diodes and looking at semiconductors, you can do some things that reverse bias junctions, like if you're familiar with diodes. They're supposed to kind of keep the electrons flowing in one way and prevent them from going backwards. But you can, if you put enough electrical pressure on them, you can kind of force them to go backwards. And the way that happens can be measured, and it can be pretty damn random, like at a quantum kind of level. So there are some interesting ways that we might collect entropy from the real world. Some other interesting sources. These are real. These have been used in real situations. Variance in the computer noise span, packet arrival times on the network interfaces, times between pulse on slot machines, which somebody probably figured out and started to use to their advantage, so that is no longer used. But that is a human interaction, right? That is something that's external. Air turbulence, radioactive decay, cellular movement. This is my personal favorite. I'm curious to know if anybody has seen this. This is something that Cloudflare put together, and it's a wall of lava lamps. And I think this even crops it. I think it's even bigger than what you see there. So what they did is they put a massive wall of active lava lamps, and they had a camera focused on that, and they take snapshots every so often, and then using that digital data from the image capture to generate randomness, which I thought was fantastic. What I didn't know when I first looked at this, though, is that it was actually patented by Silicon Graphics a long time ago, and then it expired. So I think it's and in Cloudflare, I think in Cloudflare's HQ, they have this, and they used to have an API for this. I don't know if it was just a REST API or if it was a web API, but you could actually go and pull a random number off their lava wall. I thought that was really cool. Okay, so capturing environmental noise. So again, what I'm looking for here, kind of the goals of what I'm doing is I want to look for some low-cost components for capturing environmental noise, something that we could use in a really cheap, low-margin IoT devices, which is most of them. Let's say we can't have human interaction. There's no keyboard, there's no mouse. These devices are sitting on a shelf somewhere or on your, your front ring doorbell or your webcam for your baby's room or whatever. There's no direct human input, so we can't really use that. So a couple options here that I want to look at. First, analog input from some very simple environmental sensors. You'll see in a minute, light, things like that. Also motion. If this thing happens to be not something that's mounted maybe it's something that you're wearing, it's a wearable or something like that, you could use a cheap accelerometer and or gyroscope to sample motion from the environment and try and get some parameters out of that. So here's what I did to test this. I gathered some cheap components. First of all, to run it all, I needed a computer, and we all love our Raspberry Pis. Well, this is a tiny Raspberry Pi based chip. RP2040 It's pretty darn cheap. It's only $6 or $10 depending on how many you buy and where there's sales and stuff. The key thing for me though here is it has 4 12-bit ADCs or analog to digital converters. So if I have an analog inputs, I can sample the values from those analog inputs with 12 bits of resolution. So let's look at some analog components. First of all, the simplest, cheapest one is a a varistor that changes its resistance depending on how much light is currently shining on it. So you're measuring the resistance of this thing, or the current through it, or whatever varies with resistance, to try to figure out how much light. And then these are the kind of things that are in your night lights that have sensors, right? You put a night light up that is under wall that turns on at night. When the lights go out, it's got something like this. This is just me breadboarding this, putting it together. You can see I've got my RPi over here. Over here is a regular resistor in series with the photoresistor and some buttons. This is what I started playing with when I was testing some of this out and how this worked. Something else, this is also really cheap. You can get these little temp sensors. Temperature would be a fun thing to try to get some randomness from, the temperature of the current room. But this was a great one. So the gyroscope gave me a whole lot of inputs, and it wasn't, there's 16, oops, let me go back. There's 16, stop that. There's 16-bit value, which was great. So if you remember, the analog to digital ones for the other sensors I was looking at was only going to give me about 12 bits. This will give me 16 bits of digital information 6 times over, because there's XYZ axis for gyro and XYZ axis for accelerometer. So lots of great sources of randomness just with this one chip. And these things are also very cheap. And then finally, I talked about that reverse diode thing called shot noise. And this is a simple circuit for generating some random shot noise. It's just 4 resistors and 2 capacitors and 3 transistors. When I did this, we used SMD parts, surface mount device parts, which are super, super tiny, and they're really a pain in the butt to solder by hand. Yeah, so that's kind of it. Those are kind of the sources I chose. So here's what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to measure things in the environment, and then I want to try to isolate the noisiest parts, the most random parts. So I put together this total random thing. So I want to get stuff from the environment. But if you're looking at things like I am, like light and temp and motion, they may not fluctuate that much. If you think about something just sitting on your desk, the light source might be a lamp next to you, or a lamp overhead, or the sun. Unless you're waving your hand over it or something, the light is really not going to change that much. Really the same for the temperature. I mean, the temperature of the room doesn't fluctuate that much. And even motion, if it's just sitting on your desk, it doesn't do much. So my hypothesis, however, is if I measure this with enough precision, if I get enough bits of data from this, I'm hoping that at the very low end, like the least significant bits, still might have some noise in them, either electrical noise, or at that level, the temperature is varying just a little bit, or the light's varying just a little bit. I mean, even your lights have a 60 hertz, flicker that you can't probably perceive with your eye, but it's changing a little bit there. And some of these things, are, your AC might be blowing across it or something, so the temp might vary just a little bit. You're hoping that, or I was hoping that, with these analog sensors, even though at a very high level, the macro level, that the environment wasn't changing that much, I was hoping if I get enough precision that those lower order bits still would have some entropy, some noise in them. So what I did, and what I'm going to show you what I did, is I measured these samples, and then I truncated, I kept lopping off the higher order bits until I got down to the point where the lowest level bits looked random. It looked like white noise. They looked like had an even probability distribution function. And so this talk and the rest of this talk is going to be showing you what it took to, with each of these types of sources and each of these different environments, to try to find some really good random sources from the environment. And then, once I find however many bits I can scrounge out of these 12-bit analog or 16-bit digital sources, however many bits I can shave off to get some truly randomness, and then kind of cobble all those things together in this Frankenstein method, and build up a pool of entropy from these different sources. So here's my setup. So for today, we're going to talk about two of these things. We're going to use a light sensor. So that's an analog input, and again, I get 12 bits of resolution on that when I use the 12-bit A to D on the RPi chip. And a motion sensor. That's this digital gyro, which has 16 bits of digital resolution times 6. Again, 3 XYZ axis for acceleration and 3 XYZ for orientation. And I wanted to consider two different cases. The best case, which is an active case, meaning this device is moving. The light's changing a lot, the temperature's changing a lot. In this case, it's light in motion. So it's being moved around in kind of a randomish way, or the light's changing a lot. And then I want to go worst case, it's like, okay, let's say it's just sitting there on my desk doing nothing. And then kind of compare how much that gives me in terms of more or less entropy from the device. And I collected 10,000 samples per measurement. All right, so let's see how many bits I have to lop off to find some noise, some good, useful noise, entropy. So here's what I did. I wanted to, again, try to find the lowest order bits that looked like they were uniform. They had a uniform probability distribution, which is to say that any possible value within its available range. So let's say I've picked off 4 bits. There's 16 possible values. And I'm looking at the lowest 4 bits out of 12, for example. So I want to know that the values of those lowest 4 bits can vary between 0 and 15 with equal likelihood. They have a flat distribution. In this case, I'm actually going to look at what's called a cumulative distribution function. So instead of looking flat, it's going to look like a diagonal line, like a 45-degree diagonal line. So as you go from one end to the other, the likelihood of each thing increases at a flat rate. There's this thing called a chi-square test. I'm not going to get into that now because honestly, it's been 2 years since I talked about this. I forget a lot of that stuff, but that's a common thing, common test that's given to try to figure out how random something is or how uniform the distribution is. But for as many samples as I was doing, the one I settled on was one called a Kolmogorov-Smirnov test. And you're looking for these things called a p-value. And so in my case, I was looking for a p-value, I think it was a half or better. So just for reference, so this is what it looks like to be uniform. I'm going to show you a bunch of graphs that look just like this, and this is ideal. So on the top part, you actually see the values, like these are all the values that was generated. And I think what I actually did here is I just used a random number generator and said, all right, give me 10,000 random numbers between 0 and 65,536, which is 16 bits of space. And you can see that for the most part, every value occurred twice in that time, and some were 3 and some were 1, but it looks pretty flat. And then if you then plot that as a cumulative distribution function, the p-value is straight up 1.0. It's perfect. And so for reference, as I look at some of these other ones, here's what you want to pay attention to. So that little part right there is the name of the data set. There's 2 different parts on here where you can quickly see how many bits I'm looking at. In this case, it's 16. The range of values, which of course is directly proportional to how many bits. But that you can see, you might want to pay attention to that, like how many possible values there are. And then this p-value. And I was looking for something originally started a p-value of greater than 0.5, but as it turns out, kind of heuristically, as I looked at these things, I was wanting something even better than that. But this is what all these graphs are going to look like, so I'm just kind of giving you a legend as to how to kind of pick them apart as you're looking at these things. These are the most important parts to look at in each of these. All right, so let's start with light, and let's start with the active case. So I've got a light sensor, and what I did in this case is I actually took a flashlight in my hand, and I kind of went back and forth in a human random way. I kind of put my hand over it, put a flashlight on it, and kind of waved it around to try to make the light vary from bright to dark a lot. And so at the 12-bit level, with 10,000 samples, this is what that looked like. And you might be thinking, okay, well, you didn't do a very good job because it's not very flat. Well, okay, this is human, right? So I did the best I could. But you can see it is kind of distributed. And so this is the active case. So if I'm looking at 10,000 samples, this is kind of how they fell on the graph. And also, I think the way this particular thing worked is it had a positive and negative values, but because of the way I'm plotting it from 0 to 4096, which is how many bits you can do with 12, it looks like it's to the edges when really it's supposed to be centered in the middle, but I'm representing this all as positive values instead of positive and negative. That's why it's kind of the way it is. So you can see the p-value here is bad. That curve should be, go straight from the lower left to straight to the upper right. But it didn't. So lop off 1 bit. Take the bottom 11 of those 12 bits, and what does that look like? All right, that's not good enough. Let's lop off another bit. There's 10 bits. Nope, there's 9 bits. Okay, getting better. There's 8 bits. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. That looks fairly uniform. So in the active case, when I'm trying to make the light change a lot while it's sampling these 10,000 bits, I could get a good 8 out of those 12 bits. The lower 8 bits look pretty darn good. I would call that a pretty uniform distribution. Okay, there you go. So that's what it looks like in the active case. Let's look at passive. So if I just set it on my table and do nothing, it's obvious that the light's not changing, right? I mean, it's as bright as it is and it's not varying. So like everything is lumped in one point, basically. Though you can see it's not perfect. There's a little bit of noise around there. And by comparison, this is what the active one looked like. This is what it looks like when I did it passively, just sitting there doing nothing. So let's start lopping off bits. Let's see if I can improve that. So let's just go all the way down to 8 bits. No, that still doesn't look good. 6 bits. Let's lop off half the bits. No, that still doesn't look good. 5? Better. 4. Just using 4 out of 12 bits, that's passable. That's okay. That's not bad. I've hit my p-value of 0.5 or better. That's, mostly flat. So in the worst possible case where it's just sitting there, I still could harvest 4 out of those 12 bits to get some decent randomness. All right, now let's go to motion. So remember, this is the gyroscope, and in this case, I'm only going to show you plotting one of the axes. But with that, in an active where I'm actually taking this motion sensor, and while I'm sampling it, I'm like moving it all around with my hand, trying to make it active. Even then, it was hard. They weren't terribly distributed. But let's keep moving. So let's lop off 1 bit, 2 bits, 3 bits. Oh, that's starting to look pretty good. And again, kind of 12 bits. When I get down to 12 bits, when I'm actively moving this thing, it's being jiggled around in all 3 dimensions as best I can as a human being, while it's taking all these samples, which, by the way, was painful to do. But I did it, for science. And so I've got these bits. I got 12. I can harvest 12 out of those 16 bits and get a pretty good, uniform distribution on those and get some nice randomness. Okay, great. Let's compare that to the worst case scenario, the passive case, where it's just sitting on my desk. That's even worse than the light thing. Like this thing, there's like almost nothing there, right? It just was sitting still. It wasn't doing anything. Again, by comparison, this is what it was with me frantically moving this thing around while taking the samples compared to it just sitting there. But okay, again, let's go through the motions. Let's lop off bits and see what we can do. Let's lop off 5 of those bits. Let's get down to 9. And you can start to see that it's not just a point. There's actually some stuff there. There's some variation from somewhere. Maybe like literally, maybe it's the 60 hertz of something next to the table. It's vibrating the table or something, who knows? Lop off 2 more bits, lop off another, lop off another. I can actually get, even with a motion sensor, with this thing just sitting there, I could get 5 pretty decent bits of entropy out of that motion sensor. So that's worst case. So when it was all said and done, I went through and did this for all those other things that I mentioned. Shot noise, light passive, light active, temp passive active. What I did for temp is I literally had a heat gun and a freeze spray that you can often use in electronics that are getting too hot. And I was going back and forth, and I was just trying to make the temperature change as much as possible. I'm not going to go through all this line by line, but you can see that in various worst case and best case scenarios, I was still able to get some usable bits of entropy out of that. And so if I take all those together, I can put them all together and cobble all these bits together and start building up an entropy pool. And so that is what I wanted to do. And I don't know how many of you guys have been to DEF CON, but I missed out on this for many years, unfortunately. I missed the boat, but I finally went to DEF CON 29, and I loved it. I had a great time, decided I'm going to be going every year, and decided I want to try to eventually get every kind of badge there is. If you've ever been to DEF CON, there's like 5 or 6 different badge types. There's vendor, there's regular, there's human, there's goon, there's several. So my goal eventually is to collect one of all the different types of badges. So the second year I went, I decided I want to make an indie badge. There's the electronic badges that they sell at DEF CON, but a lot of people, because badge life is a thing, that's a hashtag you can search for, people like to make their own cool, funky badges of varying complexity. And I teamed up with the guy that I met at DEF CON 29, who runs a company called Hackerboxes, which is fantastic. If you're into electronic tinkering at all or would like to get into it, definitely check out hackerboxes.com. His name's Joe. I got to meet him, and I reached out to Joe and said, hey, I'd like to do a badge next year. And originally I was going to try to do it my own. I just figured this guy creates, basically an electronic project every month. He must know how to do this. And eventually, after talking to him, we basically decided to team up. So we decided to create our own DEF CON indie badge around this concept of entropy. So here it is. It's called the Amulet of Entropy. I will show you mine here in a minute, but you can see on the little video on the left, when you first power it up, it's gathering entropy from the environment, and eventually gets to 100%. Entropy pool is full, and then it does random things. And there's buttons on the back that you can use to choose how you want to spend your entropy, but it does things like, these are all images I made, so it'll do coin flips, it'll do card pulls, it'll do tarot card pulls, it'll do dice rolls, and on this little screen in the middle, this little round screen in the middle, when you push the button and say, give me another one, it'll do it randomly, flip a coin, roll a die, whatever. The most fun one was definitely the 8-ball, and I actually bought a magic 8-ball and went through there were 20 possible runs, and took pictures of every one of them for this thing, which was a pain in the butt. But anyway, it was fun. So anyway, it's called the Amulet of Entropy. I built a website for it called the Amulet of Entropy.com that you can check out. The source code is there too if you're interested. And that's pretty much it. So the software too, if you want to look at that, it's all open source. You can check that out and see how I did what I did. And now I'm going to stop for some Q&A.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Carey. That I'm remembering my statistics classes, so thank you for dusting off the cobwebs there. Very fascinating and really, really a cool hobbyist project. We'll take questions from the room, though I think maybe I can maybe try to kick it off. And so I guess I'm curious well, obviously people in our space tend to, like to do things themselves and don't like to trust others if they don't have to. Are these techniques that one could use to ultimately essentially roll one's own safe encryption, or is there just no way to match the big players on that?
Well, okay, so let's differentiate. You should never, ever roll your own.
I know that's generally advice 101.
So don't do the algorithms. You don't want to mess with that. You want to leave that to the PhDs. But as far as sourcing, all these algorithms in one form or another take at least one source of entropy to work. They need some sort of source of randomness to feed them to do what they're doing beyond the passwords and the keys that you're used to giving these algorithms. They need other sources of entropy to do what they do properly. So this is absolutely a way that you could, if you wanted to, if you didn't trust your computer to give you good entropy, for example, you could use this. There's random.org, by the way. There are actually several sources on the web that you could go to for randomness, depending on what you might or might not trust. It's a thing. Like within cryptography, within this realm, there are people that care enough about this that that's their focus, and they've done these things. You could also probably buy hardware dongles that generate randomness as well, probably along the lines of what I just did, but probably a hell of a lot better. So yes, if you could, if you don't, for instance, trust the randomness that your Linux kernel has decided to use, or the hardware that it is based on, if you don't trust that, like maybe it's backdoored, or maybe the hardware's been modified by the NSA, you snuck in and screwed around with the random part of that to make it predictable, you could probably find a way to seed these things yourself with your own source of randomness.
That essentially I could, override whatever my, my motherboard is normally doing to give me my randomness seed. I could, in theory, take a dongle, connect it to my motherboard, and tell Linux, pull from here. Don't pull from the inbuilt one.
Right. And if nothing else, like I said, with some of the tools that I give you here, you can actually check and see what is being going on in your system and see where, you could probably figure out where it's getting its randomness and test some of that stuff.
And you
And
bare
again,
minimum could know if it's actually random. You look and go, that doesn't look uniform.
Or after do a couple of tests, like after startup, it's the same sequence all the time. That's not good. It's probably using startup time as a seed. That's not good.
Right.
Again, that's probably something left for professionals. But if you wanted to override the local source for entropy, I think you could probably figure out a way to do that. If you really want to roll your own in that sense, that would be the source of randomness.
And unlike, as you correctly said, with the software algorithms of don't try to roll your own, this is something that a smart amateur might actually be able to safely start doing, and maybe even get some better security if they're that paranoid with their threat model.
Yes, potentially. Now, of course, you're probably screwed on a smartphone, because I don't know how you might not be able to find a way to do it there. But at least on your computer, you might be able to.
I mean, giving your talk, I'm guessing they probably use the smartphone's gyroscope and the camera sensors.
They should be.
Yeah.
Yep, they should be. They should. Our smartphones are chock full of sensors, so they absolutely should be using those sensors. And they do have multiple network interfaces, so they're probably using interpacket timing on Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all those, and cellular. They could be using all those as sources of pretty good randomness.
All right, cool. Do we have some questions here for Carey from somebody who's not me? Yeah.
And by the way, this could be anything. It doesn't have to be based on what I just talked about.
Yeah, he seems like an interesting guy, so fire away within reason.
I was wondering if you had tried without the sensor, just the A to D converter, because A to D converters, if you have a 12 bits, the last 4 bits are usually noise. I mean, it will be, you're looking at about 0.1% of the actual signal. So my guess is without the sensors, you can save some money, but still get similar randomness.
Your audio is a little bit breakup, but I think what you're saying there is not even use a sensor, just basically look at the raw kind of electrical noise being measured by the A to D converter, right?
Correct.
I didn't do that, but you're right, that's something I could do, and that would have actually probably given me an idea of just how much random electrical noise there was already in the system, which I was probably picking up with my measurements anyway. My temperature sensor was getting that, plus its own randomness. And so that would have been a way to kind of have like almost like a control group.
Right,
Basically just kind of short circuit those things or put a simple resistor on there and just see what happens. Yeah.
The other thing, we have done something similar using basically 3 op-amps to build a chaotic oscillator, and then use the analog signals with A to D converter to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually fascinating. I mean, if you start doing some digging on this, it's really easy to go down a rabbit hole. There's a lot of work in this, because it turns out it's important. A lot of people don't realize they take it for granted. There's a lot behind all of this. So yeah, you do some Googling or pick a better engine, or pick a more private engine. And there is a lot of stuff going on in this field. It's pretty amazing. Again, because we just take it for granted.
Yep.
First of all, I just want to say this was a very fascinating talk. I'm an anthropologist, not an engineer, but you were able to explain everything pretty clearly. But I have a clarifying question and then a follow-up question. The way you talk about,
if you could speak up a little bit, because I don't know if it's echo or something, but it's hard for me to hear some of your.
I'll just repeat that part real quick. She said, that she wanted to thank you for a very interesting talk. She's an anthropologist, not an engineer, but she still got a lot out of it. And she had a couple questions though.
Hit me.
So the first, I've noticed that you talk about entropy as if it's a limited material. Do you believe it is a limited material?
The law of thermodynamics would say it is not. Our universe is filled with entropy. The question is how can we tap into it? So which is what I was doing here today. It's everywhere. It's all around us. Physics will tell you so. But we need to harvest it, which is the point of that thing. How do you find that? How do you access it?
Yeah, so my follow-up question to that then, is there a sustainable way to harvest entropy within our current, with our current materials?
It follows along the lines of what I was showing here today from an electronics perspective. These are ways you can harvest it using sensors and from the environment. There are lots of other ways to get entropy. If you go back to, I think, one of my slides, there's like air turbulence. There's all sorts of things around you that you can find ways to measure that if you look at it from the right perspective, has enough randomness you could pull out of it. And again, what I showed here today is maybe at a macro level, you might think, well, it's not very breezy today, there's not much air turbulence. But if you get down into the very minute, the lower order numbers, if you're looking at a number that's a million something, and that's your measurement, well, the million, 1,100,000, whatever level, that might not change at all. But you get down to the tens and ones digits, or the decimal digits on that, and it probably does look pretty random, which is basically what I just did today. So it's a matter of picking your source, and then determining at what level, how random that source is, and how much can I look at just the lower end part of that where it tends to be noisiest, and how much that I can pull out of that.
I actually have what might be an interesting follow-up question for you that I think might elucidate a bit from the question we just heard. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why, even though analog computers are far better at generating entropy sources than digital computers, we put up and use digital computers even though it actually makes harvesting entropy harder than with an analog computer.
Let's see if I can, so by analog computer, we haven't really done true analog computer. Okay, as electrical engineers.
I told you I'd give you a fun one.
Yeah. Even digital isn't digital. There's nothing that's perfectly digital. If you look at the bits and see digital values changing on a true oscilloscope or whatever you're looking, or a logic probe, you will see that it's not straight up and down. If you zoom in far enough, there's ringing, like it'll go over 1 and come back down to 1. These are electrical.
In other words, it's a Fourier series. You can't have a true square wave, so it's not on and off.
Right. So, even if you really get down into a digital analog, it's fuzzy anyway. But to your question, I'm not sure exactly how best to answer that. But analog, most of our computers today are digital. So, in the sense that it's all ones and zeros, it's all discrete voltages as much as they can be in the real world. And we try to reduce those to ones and zeros where possible. But it does help. Well, we even saw, though, it depends, because the way we deal with analog stuff on digital computers is we digitize it, we sample it. So we take temperature range, which is analog, which could be any possible value in a certain range, and then we sample that digitally with only so much resolution. So it's quantized.
You always cut it off at a certain number of decimals, by definition.
Right. It depends on how many bits you're breaking it down to and how fine that gets, but it's still discrete. That's not analog. The more resolution we can get, the more we can try to find some of those noisy bits toward the bottom. But everything in the real world is analog anyway. Even things that we say are digital, if you really get close enough to it, they're analog too. So I know that's kind of a weird answer, but.
Well, and I guess my third thought on what you said might be like, and of course then you get into the problem though that the human construct of math that we invented operates on discrete quantities. We always cut it off at a certain level of precision. So some of it could just be the way we calculate things is not doesn't lend itself to randomness because we cut it off at some point.
Sure.
Carey, did you run the NIST randomness test on the results?
The question is, did you run the NIST
Yes.
randomness test on your results?
Oh, the NIST, I did not run the NIST. I looked at, and this is 2 years ago, so forgive me if I forget. I looked at several methods for trying to judge the randomness. And again, it's how the cumulative distribution function is laid out. How close is that to uniform? And I told you about the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test. The chi-square test is another one. You're right, there are several others that test for randomness. Some of those just weren't applicable to the kind of randomness that I was generating. Some of those are made to generally to hook up to pseudorandom number generators directly and kind of test their randomness. You're right, there are established standards, and NIST makes one of them, to help you try to judge how random something is. But even then, it's more a matter of how well the random numbers are distributed. It could still, if you seed it with the same value, I think what a lot of those are really telling you is how well they're distributed, not truly how random they are. I could be wrong. This is not my area of expertise, despite giving a talk on it. these standards. So I can't speak to how every single one of them work, but a lot of them just are really trying to figure out how level is the probability distribution function.
And I'm inspired with another follow-up on that. As I said, you're recalling all my old math classes. I used to actually have to do programming that involved quite a bit of randomness, though thank God I didn't actually have to write any of that stuff. But I'm sort of thinking to myself, how much do you know about what I sort of talk about, like, your answer sort of was flirting with that randomness and unpredictability of a sequence of numbers are not necessarily the same thing, because one could argue that if it's random, but it's like a known normal distribution, in some ways it's highly predictable. Like, I may not know the exact number, but I do know a lot about the distribution of the numbers versus something that is truly unpredictable, which may not have a uniform distribution, but I as a human being might actually have a harder time predicting it. And I'm curious, like, how much you do or don't know, and maybe I'm going outside your expertise again, about like why we prefer randomness to unpredictability in terms of securing things.
Yeah, and I'm sure that somebody who's written a PhD on this will be able to give you a truly precise answer to the difference between randomness and predictability. But in this case, predictability is the really important part here, because as soon as, again, these algorithms want a source of randomness, a source of entropy to generate something that is an unpredictable output, so that somebody cannot crack the encryption, for example. As soon as one of those inputs is either predictable or even somewhat predictable, if I can bias, if I can figure out that their source of randomness, their source of entropy, and either bias it to the point where I can predict it much better than I used to be able to, or in the worst trivial case, make it completely predictable, then I can then crack the output. Because if I know how the algorithm works and I know what the randomness input is, I can completely crack the encryption. So what you really want here is unpredictability. I would say you want the inputs to be more unpredictable than uniform. If I had to pick one, I don't care that the distribution is flat, which is part of what I was showing here. What I really want is them to be unpredictable, so that someone else attacking can't predict them and therefore crack the encryption, for example. The difference there being, if it's pseudo-random, which means that I generate 1 million numbers and every number within the range appears to be equally likely, that's great. But if I can tell you every time what the exact sequence of random numbers that are going to be generated to produce that flat thing, I can break your thing. So what I really want to protect against is predictability, more than, so that predictability is more important here than the randomness data.
As I said, it'd be a fun nitpicky question. We got some.
Oh, this is tricky stuff, yeah.
Oh, I know. That's why you don't roll your own.
Yes.
Do we have any other questions for Carey here?
I know, talk about other stuff too.
I have a question that is talking about other stuff.
Here's an other stuff question.
Great.
So currently in AI spaces, there's this hype around extropianism, which is like talks about extropy as opposed to entropy when developing AI systems. Have you heard anything about that? And if so, what are your opinions? If this is the first time you've heard about it, what are your opinions? I'd like to know.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's something I cannot talk to. How is that useful, or how is that important to the AI subs? I'm curious. Where does that factor in?
Yeah, so I'm pulling from Timnit Gebru's latest paper about TESCREAL, which is basically this huge umbrella term that covers AI.
Yeah, that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, the TESCREAL cult, yes.
Yeah. So the E is extropianism. I can't say it, it doesn't roll off the tongue. But it's basically the idea that we need to harness order and predictability when developing AI systems in order to have it work for us in like something like space travel or expanding our lifespans.
So essentially, on the topic of AI alignment, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it about preventing hallucinations, or is that a different?
No, it's kind of like a futurist ideal. It's nothing that's based in current technology,
Okay.
but more so an ideal for future technologies.
If I could spin this, I think, maybe there's a question of like maybe if I can distill something interesting from what I'm hearing from everybody out of this, what is the role of like randomness in large language models and trying to point the system in human desirable directions, as it were?
That's a great question that I wish I knew the answer to. I do not.
Is an entropy when basically you can predict that life will be sustain in the future?
Yeah, that might, the internet loves to fight about what these words mean, and so we all get into fights where we might even be on the same team, but we don't realize we are because we're using different definitions.
Well, I heard like neg entropy used as to the contrast to entropy, and think of life as being like an island of neg entropy that exports entropy to its environment.
I mean, it's certainly, I've thought of it as a negative entropy engine at times, of like it decreases its own entropy at the expense of increasing the entropy of the rest of the universe even further. But, I don't know, all right, I guess, fine, I will, since Carey keeps hinting he might want some other things, I guess I'll ask, like, maybe tell us more about what in your life inspired you to now be the guru of accessible cybersecurity.
Yeah, so as I kind of hinted to earlier, the real thing that woke me up was the Snowden revelations back in 2013, and that was something, I'm not the black helicopter tinfoil hat type, but it was one thing to kind of vaguely think that, three-letter agencies could, if they wanted to, spy on me. It was quite another to find out that they were doing it on a mass level without warrants.
I might have had some similar, awakening outrage around similar things. And yes, also, it was very different to know that it was possible on the internet versus, you have pretty definitive proof,
Yeah, and so when I first got into it, to me it was security and privacy I kind of lumped together, and then over the years, I've done 5 editions of the book, I've done 7 years of this podcast, talked to lots of people, including, by the way, Bruce Schneier, those guys from Stop, and Corey, and lots of very smart people. I've really realized over the years that they're not the same. Security enables privacy, but privacy is very different. And the way I tend to look at it is that security problems, generally speaking, can be fixed. If someone steals your money or whatever, you can kind of get that back, at least theoretically. Privacy you can't fix. Privacy problems when you can't erase memories, right? I mean, if your personal information gets loose, if you get doxxed, if something important about you that you wanted private gets out, it's gone. You can't get that back. And so for me, privacy is more important than security in a lot of ways. So a lot of what I focus on, the other common difference between the two is I think the government, corporations, and yourself are kind of on the same page with security, other than this whole backward encryption thing. But generally speaking, that we're all trying to be secure, and bad things happen if that fails. Privacy is a very different thing. We're often at odds with both our government and corporations when it comes to privacy, because corporations want to use their privacy to make money because they're on Google and Facebook are ad companies, and then the government wants to use that to surveil and track us, or they'll say terrorists, but at the end of the day, that's us too. And we all, we act differently, right? And there's a reason why we have T-shirts that say "Dance like no one's watching." Right? There's a reason we have, opaque doors on the bathroom stalls. We're not doing anything bad, but we as a human race need privacy in certain situations, and it's good for us to have it, and it's very eroding, and so that's kind of the reason why I've been doing what I've been doing.
Yeah, and as to ask you a question I myself, and I think all of us in this space sometimes ask ourselves, even though here we are still fighting a good fight, does it feel like a losing fight a lot of the time with the way technology is going?
It does, and I think early on when I was doing this, 10 years or whatever, I was worried a lot about apathy. I thought a lot of people didn't care. And I looked at, after the Snowden revelations, I expected there to be a big uproar. I expected lots of things to change because it was just so horrendous. And it just kind of didn't. I think there have been positive impacts for that, it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And then I think as time went on, I think we are all aware of it now. I think people care about privacy. Studies will show that people care about privacy. But I think that people have kind of given up, like it's beyond them. Like, I can't, there's nothing I can do about it. Either my data's already all out there anyway, there's nothing I can do about it. Or I don't have the technical chops to prevent it from happening, and therefore I can't do anything. So a lot of what I do is about showing people how much low-hanging fruit there really is. And a lot of simple things that we take for granted, like, we lock our doors when we leave the house, we put our purse in the trunk when we leave our car, we have smoke detectors in our houses, that kind of thing. These are things we're used to in the real world that have caused inconvenience, but we're used to them. We just haven't gotten there in the digital world yet. So there's a lot of very simple things we can all be doing and should be doing that would collectively raise a privacy level for all of us. And that's what I preach to a lot of people on my podcast and in the book, is that there's so many things we should be doing, and if we all just did these things, we'd almost have like a herd immunity. Because your privacy affects my privacy, and your security affects mine. That overlaps. It's not just a me thing, it's a we thing. If you screw up,
and you lose your contact list or lose your photos, it's a good chance there's a lot of other people in those contact lists and photos as well, right? So the more of us that can protect ourselves, the better off we'll all be.
You had a question?
Wow.
Did it go?
What do you think, or what's your thoughts on harvest now, decrypt later, or the quantum winter of quantum computing
I
creating encryption?
What's your thoughts on the effects of quantum computing on encryption?
Okay, yeah. Well, the good news is that we've seen this coming from a long way away, and it's not here yet. Everything that we've done so far has been really minor scale. We're nowhere near cracking even like a 1024 RSA code at this point. So quantum computing is a long way to go before it's going to be a danger. And there could be leaps and bounds. I mean, it could make some adjustments, but groups like NIST and a lot of other really smart people have been working on post-quantum crypto for a long time now. In fact, there's this long vetting process for these various cryptographic algorithms, and they're already into late stages of identifying post-quantum crypto that should stand up to some theoretical quantum computer that hasn't even been built yet. So I'm bullish. I think that we're going to be prepared for that when that happens. But we won't know until we get there if it actually works. And of course, I've already found that some of these, one of the 4 finalists, I think it was NIST did the judging for these post-quantum things, turned out it failed miserably in like regular crypto. So we're still working that out, but we're getting there. We've got really smart people working on it. So I'm not terribly worried about it. In fact, there's a lot of post-quantum crypto already being rolled out. Signal uses it. I think iMessage has started to use it as well. So it should be there when we need it. I'm personally not worried about it.
Yeah, and I was just about to say, I believe Signal has a whole blog post about adding quantum proof encryption to the algorithm. And because of what Carey just said about how some of these quantum algorithms actually fail horribly on classic encryption, Signal went one step further and is actually using both a non-quantum and a quantum algorithm to encrypt everything. So it should be safe against both. But they have a blog post about it. I think specifically they're using the Kyber standard for quantum encryption. Hey, Carey, speaking of a lot of your mission is like getting over this defeatism of helping ordinary people realize there's a lot they can do and trying to build our collective herd immunity. You've studied this space a lot, and you're the expert at this sort of thing. After all your research and all your conversations, if you were going to and not talking to a room of nerds like us, if you were talking to a random person on the street who is not obsessive about this stuff the way we are, what is the one piece of advice you would give the average person that if you just change this one thing, we'd be so better off? And with factoring in that asking a lot of people to make the jump to some of these things that may not be a big jump to people like us is a big jump to people who barely even know how to turn their phone on.
That one is tough. I'll see what I can do here.
Well, fine. If you need 2 or 3, 5, whatever, I won't limit you to 1.
Right. Well, the first thing I would tell a lot of people is the only data that can't be stolen or abused is data that doesn't exist. So the first thing you can do is stop oversharing. A lot of people will say, no, it's too late for me. I've been on social media. I've been on Facebook for 15 years. I've posted all my family pics. I've been data breached 10 times to Sunday. It's too late for me. And that speaks to the defeatism you're talking about. But again, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. Just stop oversharing. These data companies, the data brokers and the advertising companies want your data, but they like fresh data. So if you were to take steps now to delete all accounts you're not using, remove data where you can, put in false data. I tell a lot of people to lie. Whether you're filling out forms and they force you to give a birthday, they force you to give things that damn well they don't need or care about. You can just lie. Now remember your lies, because if you call technical support later, they might have to repeat those lies. Put them in your password manager. But you can put some fun out there. Use email aliases. Start throw them off the trail. Use chaff. Effectively to throw these people off. And if you stop oversharing now, eventually the data that is there about you will get stale. It has a habit. And at some point they'll either flush it because it's no good to them anymore because it's old data. Or it'll just be wrong, and that works to your advantage. So it's kind of like a no-op, right? There's, in a lot of cases, just stop oversharing. That's like step 1, and delete old accounts that you don't need. But probably the simplest thing for most people other than that is stop freaking using Chrome. Get out of Google. I've got a whole series of articles about Googling. There are some that are easier than others, but by far the easiest one is to stop using Chrome. You know, it's a surveillance tool, and so I use Firefox personally. You could use Brave. There are others. I'm sure you guys are familiar with a lot of them, but that's usually what I tell them to do. Get off Chrome.
Yeah, I mean, you don't gotta convince me. But, what are your go-to things for when people push back with like, oh, but Chrome, it's what I know, and I hate change. And also, what do you do when you have people who are rightfully maybe annoyed that certain websites with limited resources target Chrome compatibility and then it doesn't work on Firefox?
Yeah, but for people that actually have legitimate need for something that only Chrome supports, because Chrome, if you add up all the Chrome and Chromium-based browsers on a desktop, it's like 85% of the world market. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, yeah, Brave is Chromium, you know, like they're almost, I mean, Edge is Chromium, you know?
Yep, Edge is Chromium. It wasn't originally when they redid Edge, but then they gave up and went Chromium, yes. So many of the popular browsers are Chromium. The only ones left are basically Firefox and Safari, or ones that are based on those. So what I usually tell them is browsers, unless you're doing something really weird, browsers are pretty much browsers. Like they all kind of do the same thing. And all your bookmarks and passwords and all those things that you may have embedded in Chrome, you can easily transfer to Firefox or Brave, and it'll be like you never left. So it's actually one of the reasons that's one of the ones I go to first is it doesn't require you to hook up with anybody else. Like, you know, to get off Gmail, to get off Google Docs, to get off Google Calendar, you've probably got a whole bunch of other people you're already sharing stuff with on those, and it's really hard to get away from because then you have to bring all those people with you. Chrome is something you have full control over, and if you change it, it doesn't impact anybody else. And you can always pull in everything from Chrome browser, including all your bookmarks or favorites or whatever, and it'll be like you never left. And for most people, they won't notice that much of a difference. They may have to get used to the UI being a little bit different, but even those they're pretty darn similar. So I try to reassure people that you're not going to lose the data you have that is already in your current browser. All those bookmarks and things that will come with you. And then once you get used to it, it's like driving a different kind of car. A Toyota versus a Honda. The buttons will be in slightly different places, but they all do the same thing.
Yeah, though I will say, it is increasingly annoying the number of big tech services that abuse user agent string and are like, I can't run in Firefox.
Right, and if you get into that, like you were saying, if you do something that, for whatever reason, is written to only work in Chromium and Chromium-based browsers, you can't use Brave. It's a great browser. It's Chromium-based, so it should function anywhere a Chrome browser would function. And if you really want to get into it, if they actually hit that particular problem, there's one website that just refuses to work because you're not using Chrome. Of course, you probably know there are plugins you can get that will lie and say that it's a Chrome browser when it's not, and get you past that.
Yeah, but definitely, I know how to manually edit the user agent string, but yes, there are plugins that will automate that little fun thing for you. Do we have any other questions for Carey? Well, we've been here a while, so we may be running down on questions. Maybe I'll try to think of something fun to end with, which is, your little Entropy amulet was really cool. Is that your favorite hobbyist project you've ever done? But I see 150 electronic project kit behind you there, so I'm sort of like, I imagine you've done quite a few of these. What are some of your favorite little creations over the years? I'm a little proud of an analog synth I made a number of years ago.
Well, and honestly, that's why I got into electrical engineering, because as a kid, I took apart all my toys and put them back together in other ways. Like I wanted to know how they worked, and then I wanted to find some other way to make them work differently. So that, to me, is the essence of both an engineer and a hacker. It's being a tinkerer. Hacker is usually used pejoratively, but to me, a hacker is just a tinkerer. Somebody who really wants to know how something works, and then usually tries to make it do something else to prove that they know how exactly it works. So hackerboxes.com, I'm telling you, if you want to dabble in electronics, they are great. This is the actual device that I built and that we built together. It's actually signed by Jeff Moss. That was fun. So I do those. When I want electronics tinker stuff, he sends me a box every month, and I can put it together, and it's great. They're all fun projects. You can learn from them. One of the projects I'm working on now, I haven't finished yet, is my hacker handle is Banana Junior, which is a reference to Bloom County, for any of you guys are old enough to know Bloom County, the old self-portable computer that looks like a Macintosh with legs. I'm actually building one. I bought an old Mac and gutted it, and bought an LCD screen for it. I'm gonna put a Raspberry Pi in it, and I'm gonna have it display probably blue padding cartoons or something. A little mechanical, little electronic project there that I've been working on for too long. But yeah, so that I do like to tinker with that stuff, especially now that I'm retired and have the time. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, if we don't have any final questions, I think I will let Carey get on with his evening. But yeah, so let's give Carey a round of applause for a very interesting talk that actually went deep into some math and stuff that actually kept it accessible. So thank you for that.
Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and as I said, you ever make it through Austin, let us know.
Will do. If you ever get up to Raleigh, let me know.
Raleigh, well, yeah, maybe I'll keep it in mind.
Or maybe I'll see if you go to DEF CON, maybe.
Well, me and my wife keep talking for years about we want to finally make it out. Definitely. I hear one has to be careful to not get sniped for fun. Maybe I'll hit you up for advice about how to do it safely.
Yeah, that is the whole thing. It's not as bad as it sounds, but that is an excellent time that we could have. By the way, if you've never been to DEF CON, just go. Just find an reason to go. If you have the B-sides locally, that's kind of a...
We've had booths at B-sides here in the past, though it's been years since I've done anything with them.
But, I mean, it's not like any other tech conference. And as an engineer, I went to many tech conferences that just sucked. They were just boring. They were infomercials. It was all about the vendors and sponsors.
What do you think about all the drama about that they're like after 25 years having to change venue from Caesars? Are you worried that's going to ruin the vibe?
Well, they've changed venue many, many times over the years, so this is just yet another switch. This will be the first year at a new place, so we'll see how it goes. I'm all booked. We'll see how it goes.
Well, yeah, you'll have to let me know how it works, and if you're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's still great, well, then maybe I'll target the next year.
Yeah, all right. Good to talk to everybody. Thanks for having me.
Later, Carey.
Bye, guys.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Same bad time, same bad channel next month. And if any of you are able to stick around, happy to get a drink with you over there at the bar in the lobby if you'd like to learn more about us and just meet people and chat. Thank you. It's a tech conference, like a trade conference. Yeah, great to see you. Hope to see you next month.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm so sorry, I don't know your name.
Kevin.
I'm Lenore. Yes.
Yes. Are you say you're an anthropologist?
Yes. No, I'm at Texas State, actually. It's hard. I'm currently working on my master's thesis. I'm studying AI philosophies and entrepreneurship, which is why I'm here today.
Would you maybe like to at some point give a talk about your research? I'm also looking for speakers.
Honestly, when I'm done, which will probably be next year.
Okay. But I hope, if you found this interesting, I hope we'll keep seeing you around, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, we talk about all the stuff, including AI stuff. In fact, probably the next talk on that we might do be my friend Ed Cavazos, who's a copyright lawyer, may have him come and talk about the whole debate around like AI and these generative AI systems and how copyright does or does not play into their outputs. Ed's an expert on that, so I might have him come give a talk about that.
Yeah. So I'm actually wondering if you would be open to an interview.
Oh,
if I could interview for like that course.
Oh yeah, no, my the former president of the board and still board member, one of the co-founders, John Lepkowski, he had a long history of being interviewed for such things. Happy to continue the tradition.
Yeah.
And I'd love to help you with your research.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, we could do it at the bar. We could schedule it for earlier time, whatever works for you.
Yeah, no, definitely I'm one of the top staff people at my medtech startup, so life keeps me busy, but
Yeah.
always happy to have excuses to do more pleasant things like nerd out and chat about stuff.
Yeah.
Looks like most of those folks head off and do this stuff at the bar.
Yeah, dude, you want to get a drink? Yeah, sure.
I didn't want to share it in the presentation, but I ran into a similar dilemma where, the anti-Tetris course? Where you build up a computer from its parts?
Well, I did know the one real thing related to that. I remember there was a UT prof years ago had a book, Bits and Gates to See and Beyond, and it talked about starting at the bottom and building
Similar
up.
idea, but different.
Yeah.
I looked at it though. What's that called?
Sorry, what?
What's that?
I think it's called From Bits and Gates to See and Beyond. It was Sanjay something, I forget. He was a UT prof in the early 2000s. I read his book when I was a